Everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss why we need more crossover events in gaming. So, this kind of spawned randomly because for whatever insane reason, I woke up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and also for some insane reason, I randomly started thinking about Devil May Cry. And in that, I was like, you know what would have been super cool? It wouldn't have made any sense, it wouldn't have worked, but wouldn't it be super cool if Resident Evil had guest characters in Mercenaries mode? And of course, I was thinking of Virgil just because, I was just randomly thinking of Virgil, but that's what kind of led me to thinking about Resident Evil. It's like, that would be like the perfect excuse to throw in a random Capcom character, is to just be like, hey, we wanted to just do something for, this other franchise we have that's also insanely popular, and we'll just throw it into Resident Evil as a guest thing. They don't really do that. They've never done that where, it's like, hey, here's a guest character. Tons of guest costumes. Like, we'll get all sorts of crossovers when it comes to costumes and stuff from other franchises. There's Resident Evil stuff in Street Fighter. There's, heck, Street Fighter literally has a crossover with Power Rangers because of the comics, so they did that in the games as well. And it's like, there's tons of stuff there where costume-wise, we have all sorts of crossovers. Coming up soon for Tekken 8, they actually have a Pac-Man level and little Pac-Man sprites and stuff as like hit effects, which actually looks amazing. I thought the level looked really, really cool. I was like, that's kind of awesome. But there's so many things where I'm like, wow, we don't really get crossovers like we used to. And this isn't just counting crossovers like Marvel vs. Capcom, where like the whole point of the game is a crossover. This is specifically like special crossover moments, kind of like the Pac-Man event happening because it's the 40th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, of Pac-Man. That's why they're doing that for Tekken, because of course it's Namco. So they just kind of threw it in there like, hey, here's a cool thing. It's also, why we had like the crazy Mega Man situation where they, for some reason, box art Mega Man, but they were like, hey, it's a crazy throwback to Mega Man, the worst throwback, but it's memorable at least. Let's be honest, it's definitely a memorable thing they did. And the RE3 remake, same thing, where it was like you go to the store and it's like, hey, box art Mega Man. So it's like a silly joke that they threw in there, but it was like, okay, like it's in there, but it's not the same as just straight up having an actual character. Obviously with Street Fighter Cross Tekken, that was, an interesting moment. Once again, an unfortunate event with it being, box art Mega Man, but it is what it is. But I feel like the crossover, like the guest character situation and just crossovers from within the same franchise, not just like Marvel versus Capcom or, X-Men versus Street Fighter, but just like Capcom. You got 100 million things. They aren't gonna do it because, we've been shouting from the mountaintops for like 800 effing years. But you know what would have been sick? If Regina was in the Mercenaries mode. Throw in a handgun and a shotgun, give her some flash grenades or whatever, and then just give her like a cool counterattack. Boom, you got a crossover character from another famous Capcom franchise, the one that everybody wants back. And it's simple. It's, you just throw them in there. Obviously, it's not as simple. You have to make the character, so you have to think of that in advance. But it totally works. It's not like you get to play as Krauser, in the regular campaign, so, it's fine. Like, they make characters that you only use in Mercenaries. It would be the same thing for guest characters. And then, you let the modders have fun with that, and then you can, figure that out if you get the PC version. But it popped in my head. I was like, man, we don't really have that anymore, where you see guest characters pop up specifically from within the same franchise. I feel like, oddly enough, if it's not a costume, you'll get a character from a totally different franchise more than you would from a partner franchise. Like, Tekken actually is a pretty great example. They'll bring in Negan before they bring in like somebody else. I can't really think of anything as far as, Namco and stuff like that would actually really work. That's why, when I think Namco, I'll be honest, I 100% go to arcade classics. Like, if it's not Tekken, it's an arcade classic. So for them, it's kind of like, okay, you kind of have to pull from other franchises. But Namco Bandai is also huge. Like, I'm sure there's tons of stuff I'm just not thinking of. And if they can get Negan, I'm sure there's someone in there that I'm just completely drawing a blank on, where it's like, oh yeah, that obvious, very insanely obvious thing should definitely be thrown into Tekken as like, a crossover situation where it's like, oh, yeah, we have these other characters that could fight. Let's just throw them in there. Capcom, like I said, is Resident Evil, Mercenaries mode, guest characters for crossovers, have Regina in there. They couldn't really do Devil May Cry, of course, like I said, that's how this all started in my head. But, that wouldn't necessarily work just because of the function of the characters and how much you would have to change to have the fighting style of that game just suddenly thrown into Resident Evil. It wouldn't work. So I completely understand that not happening. The closest you could get, you could probably do Lady. I think Lady could actually work because she does use only guns. and even her specials are just like, at this point they have special modes in Mercenaries where everybody has like their super. It's like you could count that as like the double trigger for Lady, and I think she could work, but I don't think anybody else could, because everyone else really does like run and jump. If you kept her on the ground where she couldn't jump, I think you could still basically have the same character. So Lady could work, but they couldn't throw in like Nero or Dante or Virgil or anybody else. So it would still be super cool. They could try to make it happen if they really, really wanted to with Nero, but I don't see it happening. But once again, Lady would probably be the best guess for that one. And even then, it's like, sadly, I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't think there's gonna be any, crossover. I mean, heck, we don't even get crossovers from within the franchise. Like, it would be super cool if in Mercenaries mode, they were like, hey, what if we threw in a character that wasn't even in the game? That would be amazing. They kind of did that, honestly, I think the last time they really did that was Resident Evil 5. And that was when they had like and I think even that was DLC that they added, where it was like, hey, you can play as, Barry, and you can play as Rebecca and stuff like that. And it was like, oh, that's super cool. And then if you got like the Mercenaries 3D game on 3DS, all those characters were there. But they haven't done that since. Like, even for Revelations 2, I think it was just the characters. Well, no, you know what? Revelations, I think, was the last time it happened, because you could play as like Hunk and Lady Hunk and then Wesker and all that. So that would be the last time that actually happened, where it was characters that didn't even show up in the game that were thrown, even though it's not Mercenaries, but it's raid mode. Similar, but different. But that was actually the last time they did that, which even then, Revelations 2 was like a decade ago at this point. So it's been a long time since they've done that, even within the franchise, of just being like, hey, what if we just grab random characters from the franchise and kind of bring them over? So if you want to count it, because it just popped into my head, Resident Evil Resistance does have all the different characters. That was technically, bundled with RE3. Yeah, that was with RE3, but they did add Claire and Leon, and then of course on the boss side, they had Alex Wesker from Revelations 2. Spoilers, but she gone. Maybe. We'll see about that. We'll see. I'm still waiting on that follow-up, so we'll see what happens there. But they definitely had characters that weren't in Resident Evil 3, of course, and that's its own thing. But so you can kind of count it, kind of not. It's up to you, really. But I guess that would be the last time. Which, once again, that was only a couple years ago compared to nearly a decade. It was about half the time with 5 years ago, because that was 2020, and it was 5 years ago at this point, which is also kind of crazy. But we need more crossover stuff. In general, I think we need more crossover events and references to, partner franchises and stuff like that. Like I said, the Pac-Man thing for Tekken, I think, is really cool. I like the level. I also even like the music. They had like a remix for like the Pac-Man theme, and I thought that was pretty nice. I was like, this is good. I'm gonna, I don't know if that music is out yet, because that trailer was only like a week or two ago, as of me recording at least. So I'm not sure if that full song has already been released, but I thought it was pretty nice. I was like, this is cool. The level looked pretty sweet. It was even one of the ones where you could break through the ground and go to another section. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then, of course, the hit effects. I was like, all right, that's pretty nice. I can appreciate that. I can definitely respect that. And celebrating, I love Pac-Man. Miss Pac-Man, of course, is my favorite out of the two. But Pac-Man's a classic, and that's like the Namco thing. Like, I would love it if they did a bunch of classic, levels and references, where it was like, here's a pole position level, or here's a dig dug level, stuff like that. I would love it. I would absolutely love that. Back in the day on my PS1, I had one of the Namco museum games, and I love the crap out of that. Great music in that too. Once again, fantastic game, and it was a very interesting game to play, because you actually, for anyone that never experienced that, the Namco museum games, they had a couple volumes. I think they had enough to actually spell out the word museum. So there was a lot of them, but I think the one I had was, I might have had the first one, because I'm pretty sure I just had classic Pac-Man, so it was probably like the very first one. So I enjoyed that, because you actually would start the game up, and you would actually just start in a museum, and then you walk around the museum, and you go to the different rooms, and they would like play the music, and then you would actually go to a little arcade cabinet that was either standing up, or it would be one of the tabletop ones. And you would actually have to walk up to the game itself to start the game. And then when you back out of it, you're back inside the museum. So each game had its own themed room. Like if you played Pac-Man, you would literally go to his house. You would go into this room, and it's the Pac-Man room, and it's like his house. It's his front yard and his home. And then somewhere in there was an arcade for you to just walk up to and play Pac-Man. and it was super cool. And I always thought that was so interesting. And you're just in this first-person view, and you walk in and you pick what game you want to play as you literally walk through a museum to these different sections. And I always thought that was such an interesting idea for a game back in the day. But all those games could have some crossovers, have little references and stuff. It's simpler, if they did that compared to what I'm thinking, where it's like, hey, Resident Evil could have a guest character from another Capcom franchise. That would be pretty awesome. You throw Frank West in there. He's got all sorts of weapons. You can keep it simple. Once again, I would much rather have Regina, but let's be honest, that's going to be what it's going to be, and I don't think we're going to really get guest characters anyway for Mercenaries, but that's something that they should do. That's something they should definitely do, where they have crossovers for that. Other games and franchises should totally do that. Rockstar, obviously, they throw their references in there, but it would be cool if they did that too. I mean, at this point, every character would be 2 generations old, unless you specifically went with Red Dead Redemption 2. But they could do that as well. They could have extra stuff in there where you have like special moments. They're not going to do anything where they have like the Warriors come back. I'm going to mention it every time I can. Please bring back the Warriors. But it'd be cool if they had moments where it's like, hey, you can just play this character, have like a crossover moment. Of course, there's theories with GTA 6 coming out that we will get some Vice City references, and maybe, we'll get an old Tommy Vercetti. Who's to say? I kind of doubt it, because I feel like they don't really tend to go that far, but they could make a change. They would be a great change too, to have like a classic character actually have like speaking lines and everything. That would be really cool. So we'll see what happens when 6 comes out, but they have a lot of stuff. They could have characters pop up from all sorts of things. I mean, technically, if you want to go with it, in the GTA 6 trailer, the second one that recently came out, someone did find out that the money has the presidents from Red Dead Redemption 2 in it. So if you want to go that, in a sense, they do have a little bit of crossover. They don't have like, guest characters. It's more, once again, just little references. And so it kind of confirms it's within the same world, which is kind of cool. But it would be nice if they had just actual crossover stuff, like they kind of do with, this isn't Rockstar, but Naughty Dog. They once again have their simple crossovers where it's like, hey, here's a reference to something else that they did, or here's a costume. But it would be nice if they if for whatever reason, when the The Last of Us 2 stuff came out, if they put Uncharted characters in there, just because it was like, hey, wouldn't it be crazy if we just threw the Uncharted characters in here? That would have been amazing. Or vice versa, when Uncharted 4 came out, if they're like, hey, what if we threw Joel in, just as like, boom, here, we just throw in Joel, just for like multiplayer. Just little stuff like that where it's like, people would love that. Like, I feel like we just don't get crossovers the way that we used to. We did get stuff back in the day where if you were playing, and you can find old videos of this, but we definitely had it, where they had all the PlayStation titles. It wasn't specifically Naughty Dog. It was just like full-on crossovers at that point. And it was like, hey, you want to play as, Cole from Infamous? Here you go. They just threw it in there. They just had it. Like, you could play as Cole, you could play as good Cole and bad Cole, which is pretty awesome. They had, I think the Hellgas were in there, which is Killzone? No. Is that Resistance is the Hellgas? I don't remember. But they had Killzone, and they had Resistance, and they had Infamous as well. And it was like, that's pretty cool. You could actually play as those characters. And that's just really fun. Like, little stuff like that I feel like is missing from gaming, where it's just the whole crossover element. And I think it's so much easier to do it, obviously, when you own multiple franchises. If it's all of Capcom or all of Namco or Naughty Dog, it's so easy to just be like, hey, what if we just threw in this actual full character? And it's unfortunate that we just don't get that anymore. Like, I feel like that's just something that's kind of lost to time, where it's like we used to have more crossovers. We still get, like I said, costumes like crazy. They'll throw all the costumes in the world for the microtransactions. It'll be like, hey, you guys like Resident Evil, right? Boom, Street Fighter 5 costumes. Oh, you guys like this other stuff? Here you go. Like, you'll always get a reference through a costume, typically paid, but sometimes it won't be paid. You can have really cool stuff like Ghost of Tsushima did, where, once again, not crossover stuff, but great references to all of the different costumes for all the other PlayStation titles. You got the God of War costume, the Horizon costume. There were others that I genuinely cannot remember like anything else, mostly because the Horizon costume, I remember, had a big deal. They changed it because initially you could only unlock that for multiplayer because it was a female skin. So you couldn't use that on Jin during the main campaign. And then they had to go in and they actually changed it because people were like, oh man, I want to have this costume for the main campaign if I like the costume enough. And so they actually went in and changed it. So that's why I always remember that one. And then the God of War one, I just thought looked so cool. That one I actually really enjoyed. So I don't remember like any of the other ones. Like I'm pretty sure they have a Sly Cooper one in there, which is their own game, because it's Sucker Punch. So Infamous and Sly Cooper, that's all Sucker Punch. But I don't believe they did anything Infamous-wise. I think they went straight to Sly Cooper because it was like the blue and gray color scheme. And I remember seeing it before and thinking like, that's actually really nice. But I don't think they did one for Infamous, which is kind of interesting. But, that was pretty cool. Some of those, like I said, references to their own games, but most of them were for other PlayStation titles and they just put the costumes in there. But I missed that crossover era where it was like, hey, here's a character that we own from this other franchise and they're popping up, making a guest appearance. Let's face it, the classic meme, featuring Dante from Devil May Cry. That's a classic. That's a classic. Dante was all over that place for a hot minute there. Like, he was popping up in Beautiful Joe. He was in Persona. Like, I don't know what was going on with that, but they were just like, here's Dante. Here's Dante and stuff. Which, bring it back. Let's just have random things. Like, and he's like in the story for Persona. Like, he actually has straight up dialogue and talks to them. In Beautiful Joe, Dante and Trish are just in the game as playable characters, and that's really it. And they just have like a cool play style that's, slightly different because it's on the Beautiful Joe, combat style. But we need to bring that stuff back. I don't know, man, I would love to see Beautiful Joe randomly pop up and like, if DMC 6 came out and they were just like, Beautiful Joe, like a 6-foot Beautiful Joe or something crazy like that. Like, I don't know how that would work, but that would be hilarious. I don't know if it would look good, but that's just a funny thing that popped into my head. But I miss that crossover era. It's definitely something that we just don't have in the way that we used to, whether it's, even if you're going with just crossovers as far as like guest characters, we don't get that very much either anymore. With the new Tony Hawk game coming out, I've been, hearing about that a ton, and it's like, that was one of the craziest things ever, where it's like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, you get like Spider-Man and stuff. Like, I'll never forget doing like the flip trick where he kicks the board off and then he webs it back to his feet. I did that one time ever by mistake, and it is seared into my brain. Like, holy crap. That was magic. That was magical. And then more Tony Hawk games come out and it's like, hey, you want to play as Darth Maul? Sure. They had like Jango Fett at one point. They had other characters. Like, it's just crazy stuff that won't happen now because of licensing and stuff like that. But it's like, why is this happening? Skate is a great example. They had EA. But that was a cool thing that was allowed to happen at least. They were like, hey, we're making Skate, and EA was just like, all right, like, hey, there's Dead Space over here. I assume that the people just asked, and EA was like, sure, we own that, we own you guys. Dead Space. And so Isaac Clarke is just in Skate. I think it was Skate 2. I don't remember if it was the first one, but you could play as Isaac Clarke. He's just in there because it's like, well, we own the franchise. Here's a costume. Here's Isaac Clarke. Simple stuff. Like, we have the engine. We'll just slap a costume on the character. We got him. Stuff like that is just missing these days, and it's like, man, there's a lot of opportunities where I think it could be done, and it's just not. Like Ubisoft, I'm sure, has a lot of opportunities to pull stuff off. For them, it's mostly references, but they have their little crossover things. They had it back in the day with, I think it was the first. What the heck was the name of that? I can't even remember the name of that franchise, but everyone likes the second one. And you know what I'm talking about, the spy one. I can't remember in any way, shape, or form the name of that game. But they had a crossover of that with Assassin's Creed, where you actually kill one of the characters from Assassin's Creed. And, obviously like kind of a minor player bad guy character that, isn't super relevant or anything, but it's in there. And it's like, okay, like that's a cool little crossover event story-wise. I feel like Hitman did something. And I can't recall what it was, but I feel like, it was Kane and Lynch. That's what it was. Because I think it was Eidos at the time had both those franchises, and they had that level where if you play it in Hitman, you actually run into at least Kane from Kane. I don't remember if it was both of them, but it was like at least Kane was in the game from Kane and Lynch, and it was like, oh, that's cool. Like, once again, not playable, but that same sort of crossover element where it's a bit more than just a reference or a costume. It's like, no, that's like the actual character. Like, stuff like that I feel is missing. Playable is the best, but if it's going to be story-based or mission-based where you run into somebody as a little crossover thing, it's like, okay, like, even just bring that back where it's like, oh, just that one little moment in the game, you're like, hey, like, that's someone from a totally different franchise, but it's all owned by the same company, so you get to have that experience. Like, just elements like that I feel are really missing from gaming these days, And it's nice to have references. I love, seeing the references that we get, but there's definitely moments where I'm just, when I think about it, it's like, we could have a little bit more. Like 100, we could have a lot more if we're being totally honest. And it's not that difficult either, because it would be, simple stuff. Once again, if it was, like the first example I gave as far as like mercenaries mode and stuff like that, yeah, they'd have to make a character, and then that character would have to be redesigned and made in the RE engine. And of course, the only character anybody would want would be Regina. But there are other characters. Capcom has 1 billion characters. They can put whoever they want in there, and I'm sure we'd love it. It would be a cool crossover thing. It's just something we don't have pretty much ever anymore. So I wanted to randomly bring that up, talk about the era of crossovers and how we need it to come back. Specifically within franchises. I would love to have another Marvel vs. Capcom. We got the Capcom Fighting Collection. I know people been, having their rumors lately where it's like, oh, there's 4 of these and this, that, and the other. I hope that we do get Marvel vs. Capcom 4 announced very, very soon. For sure. I definitely want to see what happens. It has to be better than MVCI, and I don't think that's a really high bar, because all you have to do is say, hey, we at least have an X-Man, and then poof, you've done better than the last game. So we'll see what happens with MVC4 or whatever they decide to call it if they don't want to go back to numbers. But we'll see what happens with that. So full crossover games like that, of course, are always loved and wanted, more and more. But I just want special guest characters. I want crossover characters where it's like, hey, you know them from this other franchise that we own. As much as I love having characters come over from totally different franchises, that's great too. I just want to see some characters be like, hey, we own them. We own this franchise. People like this thing. I'm going to say Regina 100 million times, and I know that that's stupid, but I have to put it in the ether just because it has to be done. But there could be a lot of people that pop up in Mercenaries mode for Resident Evil. There's a whole lot of Capcom characters that could just make an appearance, and it could be silly. It doesn't even have to fit. It could just be fun. The Mega Buster is in Devil May Cry 5, and I love it. They added animations and everything. Like when you die, it's the Mega Man death animation where you explode into the circles. The way Nero jumps changes to the Mega Man jump. Like they put work into it. Like they have stuff there. That's like an extra level. It's still a reference, but it's also a weapon. So, it works, it's a little bit, but it's not a full character, but it's getting close. It's getting real close. So I hope we get more crossovers. I hope we get more, stuff from companies where they just have fun with it. I feel like this is in the same vein as cheat codes disappearing, where companies just it's like, we just make the game, and then when we finish the game, we'll tell you it's not exactly finished because we got to do that day 1 patch, and then we'll give you some DLC you can buy, and then we're done. And that's how it is. It feels like it's in the same vein. Like people don't do cheat codes the same way they don't do crossovers, because it's a little bit of extra work that has so much impact, just that extra little bit of fun, even for games you don't play, even because I played some Hitman games. I can tell you, I didn't experience that Kane and Lynch level. I just know it's there, and that's kind of cool. It's just a cool thing that pops up. We love references. We're nerds. If you're that deep into it, it's that stuff kind of matters. You watch YouTube videos where it's here references to other games in video games, and it's oh, I love those. I watch those all the effing time, and it's probably the same 5 over and over again, and I'll still watch them because I might find one that I didn't know about, just because I like that sort of thing. And those are, like I said, references to all sorts of things, but having special guest characters from, within the same company or, obviously full crossover stuff is very fun. So I hope we get back to that. I really hope we do. It's just one of those things that there's always a fun little element. Like I said, same vein as cheat codes. You don't need them, but it does make you love a game just a little bit more when it's just something silly happens. And it's I'm gonna just throw in a cheat code and I just have some fun. It adds time. It adds time and memories to a game that you can already enjoy. And the same thing works for crossovers. But those are my thoughts on it. I would love to know yours. Also, what are some of your favorite crossovers? Maybe that'll be its own video where I just talk about some of my favorite crossover moments that we've had in games. But we'll love to know what you guys think about crossovers, and whether it's within the same company or just, the giant crossovers where people just come from other things out of nowhere. Where the F did that come from? Because Tekken pulls it off for who knows what the new character is going to be. I think it's in this new season, it's going to be a brand new Tekken character and not another guest character, but we'll see what happens. I wish we could see what happens for Mortal Kombat 1, but what we saw was the end there. So that's all I'm in that. Would love to know your thoughts on the crossover idea and just bringing it all back. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.